Today we're going to be learning how to cut saber sibs for the Hudls and Hudls. We'll start out with the Hudls. This is the custom miter box that we've created to cut this Hudl saber sibs. In order to cut, you'll need a skill saw that has a fine tooth blade on there. This one is for vinyl siding and works really well for PVC. That's critical to have, or else you won't get a smooth cut and your mesh won't lay smooth. We'll use Irwin clamps to help clamp down the PVC, tin snips, and then a drill with a rotary bit on there. So you'll start off with putting the PVC in the miter box. And one of the key things to when you're creating this miter box is that you want this platform that your saw slides across to be the same height as your PVC. So you'll want that to be about the exact same height. And so on this box, we have two different slide pieces right here, or guide pieces. And these two different guide pieces allow your saw to go straight over and cut the correct angle for your saber sieve. So once you have your PVC in there, we'll go ahead and clamp one end. And then we'll go ahead and clamp the other end. What this does is it prevents any bowing or twisting when you're going through the cut. Now we have our saw ready. You'll want to keep both hands on the saw and make sure that it stays down on the platform, and just take it really slow, and that'll give you a really nice cut. We've now gone all the way through. You can take off your clamps. Now you have two saber sieves that are pretty close to identical. They're still a rough cut. So what we'll do is grab our drill with the rotary bit on there, and we'll go ahead and rotor down to add a little bit of surface area, because that part right there is pretty thin. We'll then move on to the tin snip part. So you'll grab your tin snips, and because there's excess plastic right here that we don't need, we'll go ahead and give it a couple cuts so there's less sanding to do. And then we'll move on to the sanding part. We use 120 to start out with for all of our rough sanding, and then we'll move on to a 300 before you put your mesh on. So now you have a saber sieve, at least the PVC portion, that is looking pretty darn good and is almost ready for mesh. Our next step will be to go to a miter saw. You'll cut at your desired length. I can include that in the description. And once you get your miter saw, also use a fine tooth blade, cut your desired length, and you'll want to go through everything and use a 300 or 400 grit sandpaper to smooth all of your rough edges out. And then I'll move on to the next video where we'll be showing you how to do Hudl sibs, as well as how to install the mesh on this surface. All right, we're now going to cut the saber sieve for the Hudls, the Hatfield Ultra Density Larval System. We're going to use Schedule 40 2-inch PVC. Works really well for the Hudls saber sieves. We have a separate miter box, custom miter box that we made. This is specifically for the 2-inch, and then we have a separate one that we use for the Hudls, the 1-inch PVC. We'll use our skill saw with a nice fine-tooth blade. That's critical for getting a nice smooth cut. We'll need 10 snips, a drill with a rotary blade, and then for the Hudls, because our skill saw can't quite cut all the way past the 2-inch PVC, we'll use a handsaw at the end, and I'll show you that part. So we'll start out with putting our PVC into the channel, and then from this end, we'll just use our Irwin clamp and get that nice and tight. Go to this end here, a little bit of space right there, get the Irwin clamp in there, make sure it's nice and tight. We have our skill saw that's all the way bottomed out, so it's as deep as it'll go. And our custom miter box has this channel for it. We'll make sure to press down hard when we go through, and that'll give us the perfect angle that we need for the saber sieves for the Hudls. Now we'll go through with the cut. You want to apply pressure down, keep it nice and smooth, and go nice and slow. Now we're done with the saw. Take your clamps off. We now have 2 saber sieves. What we'll need to do is have a little bit of excess plastic that our saw can't quite cut through. Just go through, cut that off. These are pretty rough cuts, so you'll want to go through with the sander and sand this down. Just like the Hudls saber sieves, we'll also use our drill with the rotary bit. There's this thin part here. We'll go ahead and round that out, and that'll give us just a little bit more surface area for the mesh. Now that we have that filed out, we'll move on to to save yourself a little bit of sanding, just like the Hudls. Go ahead and use your 10 snips. Get rid of a little bit of that excess plastic. Then you can get a nice smooth edge on there. Out, we'll move on to the sander. I just use a 1/4 sheet sander. I start out with 120 grit sandpaper for all of these the rough sanding. And once you're done with the 120, you can move on to a 300 or 400 to smooth everything out before you install the mesh. So now it's fairly smooth. We have a nice rounded edge on there. And you'll go to your miter saw. You'll cut your desired length on there. And one thing when you're going through here, you'll want to leave just about a 1/4 inch or so on there. And we'll end up using this little bit of space here after we install the mesh to add our air elbow on there. And that's where the aeration is installed. And then the air is directed up the saber sieve.